Welcome to VSB After the Bell. I'm your host, Gianna Chell. With deep gratitude and respect, we are honored to be learning and unlearning on the ancestral and unceded lands of the Hamathquiam, Skohomish Ohomeom, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. The Vancouver School Board is among the most diverse school systems in Canada, with an annual enrollment of approximately 50,000 students from kindergarten to grade 12 and adult education students. Welcome to our first After the Bell episode in 2025. Today, we are going to take a look at a modern approach to learning, specifically Universal Design for Learning, or otherwise known as UDL. On the show to discuss all things UDL, we have David Nix, a district principal with VSB, and Katie Novak, an internationally renowned education consultant. First off, could you tell us a bit about yourselves?
My name is Katie Novak. I am a lifetime educator. I am a mom of 4 kids. I have a son in elementary school, 2 kids in the middle grades, and 1 son who is in high school. So as a parent, I have the opportunity to understand the full spectrum of education. And my entire career, I've been a really big advocate for including all students in the best educational experiences that are available to them. And I'm happy to share a little bit about my experiences as a teacher, as an administrator, and now as a consultant and advocate for inclusion worldwide.
I'm David Nix, and I am the district principal for inclusion for secondary schools for the Vancouver School Board. I started that position in August. Prior to that, I was a secondary school administrator at both Sir Winston Churchill and King George Secondary. And prior to that, I was a teacher for about 20 years and also administered a program for gifted students that was not inclusive. And over all of that time, I also have been working as a sessional instructor at UBC. And over the years, through sort of my work there and research, got more and more involved with inclusive education. And now that's sort of my focus of teaching at UBC as well.
Great. Thank you so much both for being here today. Lots of expertise on the show today. So I do hear this term universal design for learning. Let's start off there. What does that mean? And what does that look like in the classroom?
I can start. So the idea of universal design for learning is simply that learning in a classroom is designed for all learners to have really great experiences that are supportive and appropriately challenging. And if we're going to have a diverse group of kids in the classroom, that means that we cannot be asking students to do things in one size fits all ways, because we simply won't be able to meet their needs. And so the most generic way that I explain universal design for learning, especially to families, is imagine that you have a dinner party at your house and your goal is for everybody to enjoy the meal. But you have lots of friends who have different dietary needs, and some of them are picky. And if you were to serve, let's say, steak and potatoes and red wine, for example, it doesn't matter the quality of those ingredients, is they're simply not accessible to everyone. And so you can't invite everyone to your party if you're only going to serve, alcohol and meat, because there's many people who have a plant-based diet or who live a sober lifestyle, and you'd be excluding them by design because it's not universal, it's not for everyone. And so if you were to have a dinner party and everyone was going to eat, you would simply need options and choices, because people need a lot of different things to be able to enjoy a dinner party. And when we think of this as one person trying to create a meal for everybody in attendance, it's very overwhelming. But we wouldn't do that at a party. We would have potlucks and we would have buffets, and we would co-create this space that all of us could enter into a place and have our needs met, even though we are wildly different from each other. And so what it looks like is firm goals and flexible means, that all of us are working towards the same goals, but we recognize variability, we recognize and value differences, and we realize that to get to the same goal, enjoying a meal, we're going to need to eat different things and have different portions and help to create a menu that works for all of us. And the same thing is true in a classroom, that if we serve a one-size-fits-all lesson and say, everyone has to read the hard copy of this text and write a 5-paragraph essay, and that has to be done in 45 minutes, we're going to exclude so many people who are capable of comprehending really brilliant text and sharing what they learned from that text if we had firm goals and flexible means.
Interesting. You mentioned firm goals. What does that look like, and what does it aim to accomplish? I mean, why is it important to have firm goals?
Well, I think that one of the things that UDL really serves for us is we're trying to move away from separating people who have differing needs. So if you go back to the time that I was in school, we just took kids that had different needs and put them in a different place. And that was acceptable at some point in our history, but is clearly not the way society is set up today, and really not good for anybody, we learned over time. And so in order to have these diverse classrooms and have common goals for everybody, we need to start serving people within the same space. And, I just kind of piggying on Katie's analogy there of the dinner party, when many of us learned to teach, we learned to teach, you're making one thing for dinner and then you have to make something special for everybody who has a different need. Well, that's not just people with extreme needs, that's pretty much everybody. There is kind of no such thing as an average person. So if you're aiming to the middle, you're not really necessarily hitting everybody. And so one of the things that UDL asks us to do is to look to the outsides, to look at what are the needs of people who have extreme needs in one direction, have the most extreme needs in the other direction, and to provide, if we can provide a plan that works for those people on those extremes, it sort of encompasses everybody in the middle as well. And so what we end up with is I'll call it a village, a classroom that is a village where we're all there, we're all together, we're all learning, we're all in the same space, we're all included both academically and socially within the classroom, and we can start building for really the kind of society that those students will inhabit when they leave school, because in real society we are all together.
Something we often hear from families of neurodiverse students, whether they are gifted learners or require additional support, is the advocacy to have their child be with other kids who have similar needs. It's really to help create that sense of community and prevent their child from feeling isolated. But what I'm hearing from you, David, is that now this might not necessarily be a good thing to put all gifted learners, let's just say, in a classroom, that students should all be together in a universal classroom to mimic what the real world will look like with different types of personalities, different people, and this will help them learn how to cope with different individuals when they get into the real world. Can you dive a bit deeper on this, and why is this the case in your professional opinion? Why is it better to be in an inclusive, universal classroom?
A truly inclusive community would recognize that about 1 in 5 people are neurodiverse. And so there is an incredible community when we are truly inclusive. And I do a lot of work worldwide, and there is not a single disability advocacy organization that I know of. I'm based in the United States, and this includes like the World Down Syndrome Congress and the National Council for Learning Disabilities, that does not stand for full inclusion. The issue is that often the least restrictive environment is not full inclusion, because there's a very big difference than including someone based on placement and being truly inclusive in practices. And so I would never fault parents for wanting their kid to feel as though they belong, to be appropriately challenged, to be appropriately supported. And I think that parents have been up against a rock and a hard place where they don't have kids who feel like they belong, and they don't have kids who are making really significant progress academically or socially. And so of course you would advocate for something different. But one of my children is neurodiverse and has significant support needs academically, behaviorally, socially, and emotionally, and is thriving. It's not that we are trying to break apart really, really close communities. It's just that those communities can coexist within places that both have inclusive placement and inclusive practice. And we often are not fully inclusive in terms of population. And so it may be one student whose parent advocates for them to have an inclusive placement might be by themselves. But if truly everyone was included, we're looking in 1 out of 5 people is not neurotypical. And that is gorgeous. And so let's all get together around the table and do this better, because it is possible.
I just want to piggyback on that and say too that, within an inclusive environment, it does not preclude people from also spending time with like people. And so, for instance, I know that you mentioned kids who are identified as gifted. Well, I worked a lot with that. That's what my schooling is in as well. I was in separate gifted programs when I was a learner in school. And I am actually a believer that one of the things that is actually quite beneficial to gifted students is having the opportunity to interact with other gifted students, because it creates something that is not necessarily there when that doesn't happen. Having an inclusive environment doesn't mean that can't happen anymore. It just means that it's not that those students aren't going to be separated 100% of the time in a place by themselves. And I will tell you that for all the great things about the gifted program that I worked with, that was a separate program when I was a teacher, it was not healthy for them to be together all the time with nobody else either. This is one of those things, again, where there's a medium where you can give kids the opportunity to find other people who are like them, which I think is one of the important things that happens at school. But that also you're still part of the community at the same time.
Interesting. So you said it's not healthy for neurodivergent kids to be together. How can this be?
I'll tell you one reason why I'm not a big advocate of it now is that's not what life will be like for you. And so you're not learning. If the only thing you're learning, I'll just stay on my example of a gifted learner. Let's say somebody who's extremely far out on the spectrum of very, very, very gifted. If the only people that you learn to deal with are other people who are out there with you, you're going to have an awful hard time in society once you're not in school anymore. And so I don't think we're doing anybody a service by narrowing who they're exposed to. What you do find is that you start to develop the ability to deal with a whole range of people. And I can tell you, like in my life, I couldn't tell you if I'm friends with 3 gifted people. I may be. I don't know that I am. I certainly don't ask that of people, but I'm able to interact with a wide variety of people. And part of that is because I did go through, in my later years, a very inclusive educational program. So.
And I would love to add to that as well, that, when we talk about being inclusive, we're not talking about eliminating programming. We're talking about eliminating exclusionary programs. That there is still special education programming. There's still language development programming. There's still gifted programming, but it is, included within the environment. But the other thing I would add, absolutely agree with every single thing that is said. And then also knowing the importance of learner agency, that when you are with similar peers, a teacher can essentially design instruction that is a little bit more targeted towards the small group. And so, for example, if I know that only people who, everybody who's coming to my house is vegan, it's very easy for me to prepare a vegan meal and have everybody, have their needs met. The issue is that learner agency is becoming so important, which is that students need to really go through this process of like self-reflection and making responsible choices. And when you have a lot of similar peers together, there's generally less of the which of these is most appropriate for you right now, because you're putting people together who have very similar needs. And so you generally don't have like this wide variety of options.
Yeah. And a lot of it's to do with this sort of evolving understanding of what education is. And that part of what we're trying to do is create lifelong learners. And I think Katie really spoke to that, of the skills that that you learn through this kind of universal design and inclusive classroom are the skills that you need to be a lifelong learner. And we're no longer an institution that just says you sit and be passive while we pour information into you, which certainly was an incarnation of schools in the past. That we have a much clearer understanding that that's not going to serve people who are going to be living in the 21st century and beyond.
Can we talk a little bit more about this programming you mentioned, Katie? What does that look like?
One of the things that I always say is like what you are capable of on your very best day is very different than what you are capable of on your hardest day. And when we're separating kids into programs all of the time, and we're saying, okay, well, you're gifted, so you should be able to do, this very, very kind of rigorous cognitive task. Like there are certain days as a very bright person that like, I'm out. And when you have an inclusive group as a teacher, you might say something like, today we're going to learn about how characters interact in a text. I was an English teacher for almost 15 years. And if we're going to learn about how characters interact over the text, like I want to first start off with like a really rigorous, short, profound piece of text, from a very diverse author, for example. And we're going to start with this text. What's the best way for you to access this text today? Do you want a printed copy of it? Do you want a digital copy of it so you can highlight it, so you can pause it, you can have it read aloud? But what's the best way for you to access this text? And then you're going to pair it to a text that is something you're super passionate about, where there's like a protagonist who shares your lived experiences and identity in some way. And how do you want to access that text? And really think about what you need to do to challenge yourself today. And then I want you to share with me how you're going to, how those two characters interacted. And so do you want to do that in a video? Do you want to do that in some sort of performance with peers? Do you want to just do it in a traditional kind of written essay? What do you need today? And the amount of opportunity that gives students for kind of, okay, so where am I at today? I am actually in a terrible mood. I didn't sleep last night. If I'm a teenager, maybe I'm having issues with relationships, and it's like, I don't want to work with anyone today. And I know that about myself. And that is a very important life skill to say, today, given the goals, this is the most responsible way for me to challenge myself. And because there's this firm goal, we're all working towards understanding characters. We're all going to access really rigorous text, and we're all going to share what we've learned. Being flexible doesn't mean that the teacher has to come up with every pathway, but you can say, how do you want to do this? And that builds in that agency, that responsibility. And that is so important for all learners. And then when we have data that certain students need a push to be challenged more or need more support, that's when we can pull small groups for programming and targeted instruction based on data. And that's the value of differentiated instruction.
So differentiated instruction, a term I often hear from educators. And what you're saying is differentiated instruction is part of UDL. An inclusive classroom is one where an educator teaches differently based on the child's needs. Okay, so modern learning emphasizes the importance of student agency or their self-initiative. But if we leave it up to the kids, don't they or won't they just choose an easier option?
Despite what people think, I don't find a lot of kids who habitually under-challenge themselves. I find a lot of kids who are under-challenged because they're not engaged. But part of universal design asks us to look at engagement and provide as many on-ramps for engagement for kids as we can. And so that old question that people used to say, why do I need to know this? Why are we doing this? And the response of, because I said so, doesn't fly anymore. Nobody's going to get engaged because you said so. And so part of universal design also then asks us to provide multiple on-ramps for that. And Katie, maybe you would be a good person to talk about that a little.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, this is about, there's no easy option because the goals are the same for everything. So, generally when I'm talking about universally designing an assessment, it's like the first thing is what really is it that kids have to know and do? And then what is the success criteria? What's the non-negotiable? What is the rubric that will be used to measure mastery? And then you can just say to students, how do you want to do this to show mastery? And I think that sometimes educators feel like, It's going to be so much work. There's really only 4 options, right? If you're going to share your understanding of something, you're going to do it in something, a written product of some kind, or a multimedia piece of some kind, or some sort of like live presentation, or a combination of those things. And so, to really say to students, what are you going to choose today? Why are you going to choose it? And then to consistently monitor their progress. And, because the teacher is not the sage on the stage providing this whole group instruction for the whole class, I might do some explicit instruction to frame or to do some inquiry-based thinking, and then say, okay, now you're all going to work. I'm going to do a lot of conferencing. So, okay, talk to me about what the goal is. What are you choosing? Why are you choosing it? Do you feel like you're challenging yourself today? Why or why not? Are you feeling overwhelmed? Why or why not? This reflective piece needs to be a big part of that. And that's a part of the data collection to determine like which of the groups that I'm going to pull for small group targeted instruction. So how might this look in a math class? I might start off in a math class and say, okay, everyone, today we're going to be talking about linear inequalities. And so I want you to activate your background knowledge or supply yourself with some background knowledge. If you're like, I have nothing, I don't have any background knowledge information, I don't know. And so I might say, I'm going to put in a timer for 5 minutes. And in that 5 minutes, you can either try to solve this problem on the board, see what you can do with it, work by yourself, work with a partner, or you can watch this short video that kind of just gives you a little bit of background information. And we're going to do that as just kind of a diagnostic welcoming activity. And then I'm going to share with you why this is important, what the real world application of this is. And then I'm going to give you a couple of practice problems. And based on how you do on those practice problems, I'm going to pull small groups to give you what you need next. Right, so there's options and choices for activating background knowledge as I'm presenting about the real world application of this. Maybe they have options for note taking, but ultimately I need to know some kids know how to do this already. And I'm not going to say, well, do you want to go back and practice those, the problems? No, it's not even right, because there is data that some kids can do this already. And so once I have that formative data, being really responsive to kids, which is how we evaluate educators all over the world, is to say, all right, you 3, you nailed it right away. So here's a problem for you, work on it. And maybe it is wildly over the depth of knowledge expected, but they already have the skills. Whereas there's some students where I'm like, okay, we talked about, some lagging math skills. And so I want you to work on this problem together. And here's a math reference sheet. And here's the formulas you're going to need. And I want you to use your calculator. And you're going to check your work on your answer keys. And once you all have this, then we're going to go to the next thing. So like these blended models that allow for station rotation, there's not a lot of room for kids to just go on these paths that are not productive.
The teacher doesn't become passive once they've produced the choices. There is a lot of interaction with kids and a lot of support of kids and a lot of challenging of kids and a lot of clarification. And one of the big benefits to me of universal design that I feel like I missed out on is I happen to be a learner who was really, really good at verbal linguistic stuff. If you could read, write, and memorize when I was in school, it was really easy to get straight A's. Mm-hmm. But you know what? I can't do a very good job of expressing ideas and thoughts visually. Like if you ask me to create like a poster or a photograph or a visual representation of an important message, I would be really, really challenged by that. I did not learn how to do that. And yet, as an adult, we probably communicate more that way than we do through writing. If you think about how we communicate important ideas, and if you think about film and television and posters and movies and websites, and I don't feel competent at a lot of those things. And it's partly because I was never pushed to stretch myself because I was already good at the thing that you had to be good at school, which was reading, writing, and memorizing stuff. And so one of the things that I love about universal design is that it also allows us to not only say to people, yes, find the things that you're comfortable with and you're good at, and let's make sure that that's available to you, but also let's stretch you a bit and let's give you some opportunities and some times where you're going to be working and developing those areas that aren't your strength right now.
It's definitely a philosophy change because historically education was focused on what to learn rather than how to learn. But Rather than just reaching an immediate goal, UDL aims to develop lifelong learners. It encourages students to become critical thinkers, and it helps develop skills that can be used in post-secondary, the workforce, and in their personal lives. It's a different mindset than what education used to be, but a lot of it is dependent on trusting educators and trusting that this is more of a holistic approach to learning. We've covered a lot already, and I still feel like there's so much more to talk about. To make this conversation more digestible for our listeners without cutting it short, we're going to split this discussion into 2 episodes. Before we finish part 1 of the conversation, I want to talk about UDL in relation to the revised BC curriculum.
It is really, really fantastic. And I think it very much lays the groundwork for universal design and for building in choice. And it has moved away. Like, if you go back to the curriculum that I first looked at, it was very prescriptive and it was very fact oriented. And, it was a completely different animal than what we have now. I think we have one of the best sets of curriculum in the world, actually. And I think it very much lends itself to this type of teaching. I'm going to guess that a lot of the people who were involved in putting it together were people who understood this way of teaching, even though it wasn't widespread at the time that they were working on developing it. And I would say between the curriculum and between that and the reporting policy that came out last year, it was kind of like my dream came true. So yeah, I think we're in a great place in the world to be able to be working on this.
Thank you so much, Katie and David, and thank you for joining us today After the Bell, listeners. Stay tuned for part 2 as we continue our conversation on universal design for learning. Follow us on Instagram at VSB39 to make sure you don't miss when the next episode drops. Or subscribe to VSB After the Bell on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Special thanks to music teacher Mr. Bonnell and the Nightingale Elementary students for the original theme song.